Something massive just shifted in this war, and it happened in the last 18 hours. A Ukrainian F-16, a Western fighter jet that Russia publicly declared would make no meaningful difference to the conflict, just engaged a Russian Su-35 fighter in direct air-to-air combat over the Eastern Front, not from a distance, not with a ground-based missile, aircraft to aircraft, and the Ukrainian pilot won. This morning, the chairman of the United States Joint Chiefs of Staff confirmed it to Congress. That single confirmation changes the entire calculus of how this war will be fought going forward, but that is not even close to the biggest development from the last 24 hours. Stay with me because I need to walk you through exactly what is happening on these battlefields right now, and why the conventional understanding of where this conflict stands is dangerously outdated. My name is Ben Hodges. I commanded United States Army forces in Europe. I spent my career studying military strategy, how wars are actually won, how institutional failures lead to battlefield collapse, and what it looks like when an army believes it is winning but is actually in the early stages of unraveling. And I am telling you on the record today that what we are witnessing in Ukraine represents a strategic and operational revolution that most military analysts in the West have still not fully registered. Russia entered this war believing three things: that Ukraine would fold within days, that the West would fracture under economic pressure, that time was fundamentally on Russia's side. None of those things have happened. What has happened instead is something far more significant. Ukraine has not just survived. Ukraine has adapted, innovated, and evolved at a pace that Russian military planners did not anticipate and that Western observers have dramatically underestimated. Let me start with what the world is talking about this morning, because it is not just a single kill. It is a demonstration of something far deeper. On July 16, 2026, something occurred in the airspace over eastern Ukraine that Russia tried desperately to explain away. A Russian Su-35 fighter jet, one of Moscow's most advanced air superiority aircraft, a 4.5 generation machine with thrust vectoring engines, with some of the most sophisticated radar systems ever mounted on a Russian aircraft, was shot down. Not by a surface-to-air missile, not by ground-based air defense, by a Ukrainian F-16 in direct aerial combat. Russian state media immediately began spinning the narrative. Pro-Kremlin Telegram channels claimed it was a Patriot missile. They said the Su-35 fell to American ground-based air defense. Aviation analysts were skeptical. The details did not fit. For nearly 2 weeks, the official truth sat in bureaucratic channels. Then yesterday, General Dan Caney, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, sat before Congress and said it plainly. Ukraine's F-16 achieved its first confirmed air-to-air victory. A Ukrainian pilot flying an older generation Western jet looked a Russian Su-35 in the eyes, and the Ukrainian pilot won. Let me explain why this is so strategically significant, because I do not want anyone to underestimate what just happened in that sky over eastern Ukraine. When Ukraine received its first F-16 late last year, Moscow dismissed them entirely. Russian state media called the donation symbolic. Russian military analysts said the older generation Western jets had no chance against the Su-35. And on paper, they had a point. The Ukrainian F-16S are MLU variant aircraft, most of them built between 1982 and 1990. They carry older generation AIM-120 air-to-air missiles. The Su-35 carries longer range weapons, features a more advanced radar, can fly at higher altitudes and greater speeds. On pure technical specifications, Russia's aircraft should have won that engagement decisively. But here is what matters about modern warfare that the specifications do not capture. War is not fought on a spreadsheet. What Ukrainian OSINT channels with strong credibility on prior reporting described was not a simple one-on-one dogfight. It was a coordinated engagement. 3 F-16 working together, ground-based radar feeding, targeting data in real time. One aircraft flying lower, acting deliberately as bait, drawing the Su-35 into a kill zone. the other two maneuvering into position. And Ukraine's layered air defense network, the Patriot batteries, the NIAMs, the ground-based sensors, all of them feeding data into a single coherent operational picture that the Su-35 pilot never saw coming. That is not just a tactical victory between two aircraft, that is a demonstration of what military theorists call system of systems warfare. Ukraine integrated Western sensors, Western missiles, NATO training protocols, and its own operational creativity into a kill that Moscow's most advanced air superiority platform could not avoid. And that has implications that extend far beyond that single engagement. Russia has been using air power to maintain pressure on Ukrainian ground forces. Russian Su-35s and Su-30s have been launching glide bombs from standoff range, dropping guided munitions from Russian territory onto Ukrainian cities, bridges, supply lines, troop positions. They could do this with relative impunity because those aircraft were operating outside what Russia believed to be Ukraine's reach. That perception has now evaporated. Every Russian pilot flying anywhere near the front lines now operates under the assumption that an F-16 might be waiting at the edge of visual range. That psychological shift is not abstract. It will affect how Russia operates its air force. More cautious. Further back from the front, fewer aggressive strikes into Ukrainian territory, fewer glide bombs falling on Ukrainian cities is a direct, measurable consequence of one air-to-air kill. But the story from the last 24 hours goes far deeper than that single engagement. What Ukraine did at Kalino airfield in the last 36 hours is what concerns Russian military planners far more than any individual aircraft kill. Kalino airfield sits approximately 7 kilometers east of the city of Kursk. It is home to Russia's 14th Fighter Aviation Regiment. This base has been a staging point for Russian air operations against Ukrainian positions. Ukraine has struck it before, but what happened overnight into July 22nd was qualitatively different. Ukraine's 15th Separate Artillery Reconnaissance Brigade, operating under the call sign Black Forest, sent strike drones into that airfield. The footage is remarkable. The drones approached 2 Russian MiG-29 fighters parked side by side, perfectly visible to Russian air defense. The strike drone hit, explosion. Then the camera shifted to a Pantsir S-1 air defense system positioned specifically to protect those aircraft. The Pantsir disappeared in a second explosion. Ukraine destroyed the air defense system that was supposed to prevent Ukraine from destroying the aircraft. The reconnaissance drone filmed all of it. Multiple Russian air defense layers that ring that base were insufficient to prevent the strike. This is a pattern that matters far more than any single headline. Russia has the hardware. Russia has the air defense systems. But Russia's systems do not communicate with each other effectively. Their radar coverage has gaps. Their reaction times are slow. And Ukrainian drone operators have spent 4 years studying exactly where those gaps are and how to exploit them. Ukraine is not fighting Russia's military as it exists on paper. Ukraine is fighting Russia's military as it actually functions. And the difference between those two things is where Russia keeps taking casualties. Now let me shift to the maritime front because the numbers coming out of the Sea of Azov are staggering. Ukraine's naval drone force struck 13 additional vessels from Russia's Shadow Fleet in the last 24 hours. That brings the total number of Shadow Fleet vessels hit to 196. Nearly 200 oil tankers, dry cargo ships, tugboats, all of them sanctioned by the international community, all of them smuggling fuel and supplies to Russian-occupied Crimea, and Russian military forces in the region have been struck by Ukrainian naval drones. This is not a series of isolated strikes. This is a sustained maritime interdiction campaign that Ukraine has named Operation Maloka, a darkly ironic reference to the milk route these tankers were supposed to be running. The commander of Ukraine's unmanned systems forces, a man known by the call sign Madar, posted this morning simply, "The Shadow Fleet exits the chat." Why does this matter beyond the battlefield? Because Russia's Shadow Fleet is Russia's money. These are the vessels Russia uses to move sanctioned oil past Western restrictions. When Ukraine sinks or damages these ships, it is not just cutting off fuel to Russian forces in the south. It is directly cutting into the revenues that pay for Russian missiles, Russian drones, Russian artillery shells, and the salaries that pay Russian soldiers. Ukraine is attacking the economic engine of this war. The West spent months debating whether Ukraine was allowed to strike inside Russia with Western weapons. The Western conversation has largely gone quiet as Ukraine methodically dismantles Moscow's maritime logistics using drones that cost a fraction of what Russia pays for each oil tanker. Now I need to tell you about something political that happened behind closed doors in ways that should concern everyone watching this conflict. On July 21st, Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev stood in Berlin beside German Chancellor Friedrich Merz and revealed something remarkable. Former senior German officials and former senior Russian officials held a secret meeting in Baku, Azerbaijan between July 12th and July 14th. They were there to discuss possible pathways to ending Russia's war against Ukraine. Let me be precise about who was in that room. The German side reportedly included Ronald Pofalla, former chief of staff to Chancellor Angela Merkel, and Matthias Platke, the former premier of the state of Brandenburg. The Russian side reportedly included Valery Fadeyev, head of Putin's Council on Civil Society and Human Rights, and Viktor Zubkov, a former Russian deputy prime minister who currently chairs the board of Gazprom, the state energy giant with direct ties to the Kremlin's financial power structure. Azerbaijani authorities said they knew nothing about the meeting until after reviewing flight records. President Aliyev's words were careful. His implication was unmistakable. These two delegations flew into Baku without informing Azerbaijani authorities and held discussions about Ukraine's future without Ukraine present and without any official mandate from any elected government. Chancellor Merz said he was not aware of the meeting. Germany's government has formally distanced itself from the talks, but the damage, as they say, is already done. Ukraine's foreign ministry responded this morning. Their spokesperson was direct. These reported discussions have no official mandate from Ukraine, and their significance for the real peace process is, in his words, close to zero. I understand why Ukraine responded that way. Strategically, Kiev is right to push back hard. But here is what this kind of back-channel diplomacy actually does. It sends a signal to Moscow that there are influential voices in Germany willing to explore peace terms without Ukraine at the table. Every time that signal reaches Moscow, it reinforces Putin's core strategic calculation, which is that if he holds on long enough, the Western coalition will fracture. Russian intelligence has been working this angle since the beginning of the war. They look for divisions. They identify individual actors willing to talk outside formal channels. They use those contacts to construct a picture of Western weakness that they then exploit at the negotiating table. Whatever the personal intentions of those former German officials, they handed Moscow a propaganda gift, and Moscow will use it. I also want to connect this to reporting from sources close to the Russian government. The Financial Times reported this month that Moscow is unlikely to seriously engage in any meaningful negotiations before February 2027. The reason is specific. Putin reportedly believes that by February 2027, Russian forces will have completed the occupation of all of Donetsk Oblast, and that the United States will pressure Ukraine into making territorial concessions rather than continuing the fight. That is Putin's plan. He is not looking for peace. He is looking for time. He is looking for frozen negotiations that give his forces space to consolidate gains while the Western public grows tired of the cost of supporting Ukraine. Every back-channel meeting, every unofficial contact between Russian officials and Western figures outside formal channels advances that plan. When Moscow sees senior German officials willing to talk without Kiev present, Putin sees confirmation that his strategy is working. Now, let me talk about something that has not received enough attention in Western media because it reflects Ukraine's evolution into something far more sophisticated than a simple aid recipient. The Wildberries strikes. Wildberries is a massive Russian e-commerce and logistics company. Ukraine struck two more of its logistics centers in the last 24 hours. Why does this matter for a war update? Because Ukraine's military intelligence has identified Wildberries' distribution network as an integrated part of Russia's military supply chain. Russia has been using civilian logistics infrastructure, warehouses, sorting centers, transportation hubs operated by companies like Wildberries to move military supplies under commercial cover. By targeting those facilities, Ukraine is conducting what I call sophisticated economic warfare. When Russia tries to defend those facilities militarily, it exposes the military use of supposedly civilian infrastructure. This is not just physical destruction. This is intelligence warfare layered on top of military strikes. It reflects the level of operational sophistication Ukraine has developed specifically because it has spent years penetrating Russian logistics networks with human intelligence assets and signals intelligence provided by Western partners. The BAE Systems partnership announced this week also deserves serious attention. British defense manufacturer BAE Systems has entered a formal agreement to manufacture the L-119 light artillery system inside Ukraine. This is significant for two reasons. First, it means Ukraine is building Western weapons on Ukrainian soil, reducing its dependence on supply chains that run through Europe and are vulnerable to disruption. Second, it means Ukraine's defense industrial base, which has grown from roughly $1 billion in annual output in 2022 to more than $50 billion in potential production capacity 4 years later, is now integrating directly with NATO standard weapons manufacturers. Ukraine is not just a recipient of Western aid anymore. Ukraine is becoming a defense industrial partner. That fundamentally changes the long-term equation of this war. Then there is the Mura. Today, the United States announced it will begin manufacturing Ukraine's Mura naval drone domestically. The Mura is the autonomous naval vessel that helped sink multiple Russian Black Sea Fleet warships, including vessels that Russian naval doctrine considered survivable. The Mura is fast, difficult to detect on radar, can carry significant explosive payloads, and is cheap enough to produce in volume. When the United States begins manufacturing it at scale, Ukraine's maritime interdiction capability multiplies dramatically. Think about what this combination means. The United States manufacturing Mura drones, BAE Systems manufacturing L-119 artillery inside Ukraine, F-16S now proven in air-to-air combat, Shadow Fleet vessels being struck night after night in the Sea of Azov, Kalino airfield struck with drones that defeated both Pantsir and Tor air defense systems. And Russia's response, according to open sources today, was to issue a wanted list for Ukraine's new army chief, General Syrskyi. Moscow put him on a wanted list. When your enemy puts your commander on a wanted list, that is not strength. That is frustration. That is the behavior of a military that is losing the information and command fight. Let me step back and give you the strategic picture as I see it right now, because this is where I provide analysis that you are not going to hear on television. Russia entered this war with three core beliefs. Ukraine would collapse quickly. The West would fragment under economic pressure. Time was on Moscow's side. None of those beliefs have been validated by events. What has happened instead is this. Ukraine has survived, adapted, and innovated at a pace that Russian military planners did not anticipate. Ukraine has developed a drone industry that is now exporting weapons to NATO countries. 27 nations have signed the international drone deal that Ukraine announced in July, giving Kyiv legal authority to export its domestically produced weapons internationally. 15 of those nations are NATO members. Ukraine is now a weapons exporter. That is extraordinary for a country fighting for its survival. Meanwhile, Russia's casualty rates remain staggering. Ukrainian military reporting in mid-July indicated 1,600 Russian troops lost in a single day. That number comes directly from Ukrainian General Staff reporting, which tracks killed and seriously wounded. Even at half that number, the cumulative toll on Russia's ground forces since the beginning of 2026 is devastating. Open source estimates suggest Ukraine's drone campaign since January of this year has hit more than 800,000 confirmed Russian military targets and killed or seriously wounded an estimated 167,000 Russian troops. Those numbers, even if directionally correct rather than precise, describe an army that is burning through its manpower at an unsustainable rate. And yet Russia continues attacking. Missile and drone strikes on Ukrainian cities continue. Kyiv was struck massively on July 2nd. 22 people killed, dozens more injured, a 9-story residential building destroyed, 64 apartments gone, children died, and Moscow called it a military operation. That disconnect between Russia's stated war aims and the reality of targeting apartment buildings is where the moral clarity of this conflict resides. And it is why Ukraine continues to fight with a determination that outside observers consistently underestimate. These people are not fighting for abstract geopolitical concepts. They are fighting because Russian missiles are landing on their homes, because Russian troops are occupying their towns, because the alternative is subjugation by a regime that has shown no interest in treating occupied populations with any form of dignity. Where does this leave us today, July 22nd, 2026? Ukraine has demonstrated this week that its F-16 fleet can kill Russia's best aircraft in the air. Its drone forces are systematically dismantling the Russian shadow fleet in the Sea of Azov. Its long-range strike drones can reach deep into Russian territory, hitting airfields, oil refineries, logistics centers, and space communications infrastructure. Its defense industrial base is now partnered with Western manufacturers at a level that makes it increasingly self-sufficient. And its military command, despite Russia's attempted intimidation through wanted lists and propaganda, is operationally coherent and strategically creative. Russia, by contrast, is conducting back-channel diplomacy through unofficial envoys, trying to find fractures in Western unity because Moscow has been unable to find victory on the battlefield. That is the real signal from the Baku meetings. It is not a sign that Russia is close to peace. It is a sign that Russia is searching for a political escape route from a war it has not been able to win. I want to leave you with this. War is measured in 4 variables: time, attrition, will, industrial capacity. Russia is losing the attrition fight. Its industrial capacity is under pressure from sanctions and Ukrainian deep strikes. The will of the Ukrainian people remains unbroken. The only variable where Russia retains any advantage is time, and that is only true if the West loses patience. If Western governments, pressured by unofficial back-channel meetings and economic fatigue and political voices calling for frozen conflicts, begin pulling support before Ukraine achieves its objectives, then Russia's calculation about holding out until February 2027 becomes viable. If the West holds firm, it does not. The F-16 kill yesterday is a reminder Ukraine is not losing. Ukraine is fighting and fighting smart. And the world needs to stay focused on what is actually happening on this battlefield, not on what Russian negotiators want us to believe in quiet rooms in Baku. The momentum in this conflict has shifted, not toward Russia, toward Ukraine, and that shift is accelerating.